Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to Becoming Sister Wives Book Club. Today, I'll be giving my commentary on the second half of Chapter 5 on Meri. If you are a sub to my YouTube page, Sister Wives with Mary Jane K, please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. During the 12 years between having Mariah and the miscarriage, the family went through many growing pains. Meri says Janelle struggled to make her path and to find a way to assert herself and find her identity. They had to work in unison and make decisions that put the family first. The main problems they had came from two issues: their living situation and Cody's job. Cody had to travel a lot for work, and when he did, he left behind 3 wives who had to function as single mothers. I thought it was a sisterhood and the whole family was the priority. If that was the case, then the women should not have felt like single moms. I find this interesting because many monogamous couples have kids and the father may have to travel for work and the mothers don't have 3 other women as sister wives at home. Shouldn't the sister wives be functioning in a more sisterly, supportive manner and come together as a group with Cody away? They always tout the benefits of having sister wives, the kinship and the bond and the extra support and care. But here they say when Cody leaves to travel for work, they feel like single mothers. But on the nights Cody is off with another woman and they are alone, they say they are fine with it and it doesn't bother them. They enjoy the alone time, in fact. But here in this scenario, when Cody leaves her work, they are single mothers. Janelle moved into her own place during a period when Cody was on the road a lot. Meri says, although she and Janelle had been struggling for a decade under one roof, that separation was still hard on the children. Although they hid their lifestyle from the public, there were still people who knew the Browns were polygamists. Some of those people referred to them as Cody and his families, and that didn't sit well with Meri. To Meri, her family wasn't comprised of Cody and his families. They were one family who lived in 3 separate homes, despite any differences they may have. She says living in 3 separate homes caused an identity crisis. She wondered how they can all be one big family while living in 3 separate homes. Meri wondered how Cody could be a good father if he wasn't present all of the time with all of his children under the same roof. At this time, Meri and Janelle both worked, and Christine took care of the majority of the child care and the homeschooling. Cody eventually got a job in Utah that did not require traveling so much, so he could be present more regularly for all of his kids. What brought the Browns together as a family was living under one roof. The house had belonged to a polygamous family. This is the Lehi house, of course, that is featured on the show in the first 2 seasons. It's a large house with 3 separate apartments that are also attached. Each wife having their own apartment was a solution to a lot of their struggles. It joined them as one united, strong family, and it cemented the Browns' identity as one family. The house allowed Cody to be home with all of his kids, and Cody could see them all equally. Regardless of what wife's night it was, Cody could still tuck all of his kids in and do all of the fatherly things for all of his children, and he wouldn't have been able to do this if they were living in 3 separate homes. Around the move to Lehi, Meri came to terms with not having any more biological kids. But because she lived in one house with everyone, she was able to further appreciate all of her blessings that she got in plural marriage. Even if Meri couldn't have more children, Mariah still had siblings through her sister wives. And Meri says if she hadn't chosen polygamy, if she hadn't heeded her call to polygamy, she would never have achieved her dream of having a large family. She says plural marriage blessed her with what her body denied her. Meri says of her relationship with all the Brown kids, I have a wonderful relationship with all the kids in our family. Naturally, with so many children, I'm closer to some than to others. It's hard to describe my relationship to all the children who are not biologically mine. I have been an essential part of their upbringing in the same way that Janelle and Christine have been a part of Mariah's. I may not be their biological mother, but I am a mother to them. We know Meri loves kids, and a big part of her identity is being a part of the family. But in later seasons, I believe it's in the episode where Meri goes to the marriage counseling with Nancy, when Cody says she deceived him from the start, he told Meri one of the first things she needed to do was to fix her relationship with the older kids. I can't remember the exact episode, but I distinctly remember Cody saying Meri needed to make things better with the older kids. So I'm not sure if it's Meri's overbearing nature or some of the issues with some of her sister wives, particularly Janelle, but we know Cody asked Meri to improve things with the kids. I also know a while back, Maddie did a social media post that some think was referencing Meri. Of course, we don't know. But we do know Meri does adore the kids from the show, even if she may have some issues with the older ones. Meri says once she moved to the big house, she had to work on her relationship with Janelle and their issues. She and Janelle were both devoted to their faith and to the family. Even if they had a tenuous relationship, they still both shared the goal of wanting to create a safe, healthy environment for the kids. Meri says people often ask if she would be friends with her sister wives if they weren't her sister wives. She says she and Janelle are very different people. They see the world in opposite ways and they handle situations very differently. If Meri wasn't married to Cody, her friendship with Janelle wouldn't have gone past basic cordiality. But because they both share a husband, many of their differences are brought out into the open and confrontation is impossible to avoid. The nature of their singular relationship has caused both Janelle and Meri to confront their differences and to examine the way that they treat each other. They both chose to marry Cody, but they weren't aware of the struggles that would lay ahead in the relationship between them. Because they were both committed to the family, they found a way to travel down the path together. Meri writes, "One of the benefits of polygamy is that as you grow in the religion, you are forced to examine yourself and your treatment of others, especially your sister wives, with whom you often have complicated relationships. Polygamists and polygamous families are often works in progress. Janelle and I have never had a close relationship. We don't gossip on the phone or grab lunch in our free time. I don't think that we will ever sit down and tell each other our deep, dark secrets. But we are a family, and for that reason, we love each other." So basically, Janelle and Meri tolerate each other because they prioritize the family. Janelle and Meri are still working on their issues today. They even went to counseling, but in my opinion, there is so much resentment between them, and sometimes Meri seems to have trouble taking accountability, even though she recommended last tell-all that Christine needed to do the hard work of looking inward. Does Meri truly look inward herself? Janelle seems to be able to, more than Meri at least. Meri still refuses to admit that she would have left had the catfish been a real guy. She still insists she was never planning on leaving, despite the hundreds of voicemails that suggest otherwise. Meri says she and Janelle worked hard to develop a good, functional relationship because it is best for the family, and when it comes to the family, they both share the same values of putting the family first. They love each other's kids, they are both devoted to the lifestyle and to the hard work it takes to make it work. They know there will always be bumps in the road, but it's worth it. When Meri's sister passed, Meri had to come to terms with her own mortality, and she realized that Mariah would have sister wives as moms who could love and raise her if anything, God forbid, should happen to Meri. Although their living situation and Cody's work situation were stabilized, Meri felt the need to carve out her own space in the boisterous and chaotic Brown family. Meri says she often felt slighted in family decisions because she only had one child. Meri voiced her opinions a little too aggressively, but she felt her opinions weren't even taken into consideration. Remember on the show when Janelle said they aren't like the stereotypical polygamists because the women in their family have voices and they are heard? And we see many examples of the wives not feeling their opinions matter or that their voices are heard. Here, Meri is saying that because she had just one child and because she stated opinions aggressively, she wasn't taken into consideration with family decisions. Meri says when they lived in Wyoming when the older kids were young, she and Christine shared the responsibilities of homeschooling and the household upkeep. While Janelle worked full-time, Christine and Meri both worked part-time jobs so one mom could always be home with the kids. They moved back to Utah when Mariah was 10, and Meri started working immediately, and Christine took on the duty of homemaker mom. Meri realized although her commitment to the family was important, she also needed to do things for herself. Over time, Meri's insecurity over having one child grew. As Mariah grew up and gained more and more independence, Meri wondered how important she was to the daily life of the family. Meri began to wonder if it would even matter if she wasn't around. She never considered leaving, but she was anxious about her place in the family and about what her function was in the daily life of the family. I think that having kids and raising them glues the sister wives together in some way. And even if they aren't close, the sister wives have to interact because the kids are close. So as Mariah grew, Meri interacted less and less with her sister wives regarding all of the mom stuff. And because her kid was basically grown and older, she probably was left out of the equation a lot. Meri felt insignificant to herself and to her sister wives, Janelle and Christine. To Meri, it didn't seem like Janelle and Christine saw any point to her being in the family. Meri knew she had to regain her identity to find her happiness, and she would have to make some changes. Meri always wanted to go to college, but she didn't want to pursue it unless she had a clear goal of what to study. Her family jokes that Meri has popcorn thoughts that come out of nowhere, and one morning she had a popcorn thought that she wanted to work with at-risk youth. The thought nagged her even though she tried to ignore it, so she eventually paid that thought some attention. She told Cody, but Cody didn't take her seriously, and he wasn't very supportive of her. Meri knew she needed to pursue something outside of the family to feel fulfilled. Meri wanted to do something for herself and for others, and she wanted an outlet outside of the family. Meri thinks because she had one child and that made her feel less significant than her sister wives, she was propelled to find something that would fulfill her. When Meri enrolled in university and started taking classes in counseling, Cody saw how committed Meri was, and Meri's sister wives encouraged her and were very supportive. Eventually, Meri got a job working with troubled teens. Meri was satisfied with her job, and she wanted to pursue her degree to work as a counselor herself one day. Things stabilized in the household, and all of the sister wives got accustomed to each other's quirks and differences. Everyone was more mature because they were older, and they also spent years by now raising kids together. Not all of the relationships were fully functional, but everyone learned to set aside minor disagreements for the greater good. The house had a happy attitude because Janelle and Meri were happy at work, and Christine was happy in the home. Meri writes, "After 16 years and 13 kids, Cody, Janelle, Christine, and I had figured out who we were as a family and how to make things work. We were a well-oiled unit, and we could see this reflected in our children's happiness. Although the Brown family was functioning, my relationship with Cody was floundering. After nearly 20 years of marriage, issues that we had left to simmer had begun to boil over. Just as everything was happy at home and Meri felt fulfilled at work, Meri and Cody were suffering through a low point in their marriage. So they took a drive together and they worked on improving their relationship and their communication. They passed by their friend Reba's house to say hi, and Reba's cousin was outside loading her kids into a van to drive home. They started chatting with this woman, Robyn, of course. Meri felt an immediate connection to her. When they drove away, Meri had a popcorn thought that this woman will be in their lives, and that woman was Robyn. Meri told Cody her thoughts, and she wasn't sure if Cody would marry again, but she never imagined she would be so closely involved from the start. Well, did Meri really never imagine being so involved? Because she was involved to some extent with Janelle and Christine, and they joked on the show that Meri is in mergers and acquisitions. Meri and Cody learned that Robyn was divorced, but she believed in plural marriage. Meri and Cody talked among themselves about Robyn. She writes of the secret that she and Cody shared together. It didn't seem necessary to bring up the subject of Robyn to the rest of the family until it was more apparent that there might be a potential for a courtship. So she became a little connection that Cody and I shared. a sweet, special bond in a time of turmoil between us. Meri continues, since things were rocky between Cody and me, it was a little unusual to consider bringing a new wife into the picture, especially given that I never, ever thought that Robyn would solve my problems with Cody. I just felt drawn to her in a way that satisfied me. I wanted her as a friend, and I had a clear vision of her in our lives. Janelle and Christine had not yet met her, so this little relationship between Cody, Robyn, and me felt special. I find it interesting that Meri, during a bad point in her marriage with Cody, encouraged Cody about Robyn, and she relished in having a secret with Cody. I also think during a low point with Cody, when she already questioned her role in the home and she felt she wasn't valued by her sister wives, she encouraged Cody getting a sister wife because it benefited her. In my opinion, Meri felt Robyn could be a useful ally to her in the home and within the dynamic. It probably gave Meri an odd purpose in life and a reason to get more attention and a higher standing with Cody since their relationship was in a bad place. Keeping this secret bonded them, and I'm sure Cody paid Meri a lot more attention as they secretly indulged in wanting this courtship, a secret hidden from her sister wives. Cody could only go to Meri initially regarding Robyn, so it got Meri more attention from Cody and a higher favor from Cody. Did Meri want a sister wife just to have a friend, or did she want Robyn as an ally and as a way to improve things with Cody? I think Meri was getting some benefit from Robyn and from this secret. How much loyalty is there within the Brown family dynamic among the adults if Meri and Cody were keeping this private secret only between them and Robyn and hidden from sister wives, Janelle and Christine? It shows a lot of manipulation and disloyalty to the other wives. It's incredibly conniving and manipulative of Meri to keep this from Janelle and Christine. Also, it's manipulative and disloyal of Cody as well. My opinion, at every step, there should have been full transparency with all of the adults in the family. Meri's main concern wasn't the good of the larger family or of her sister wives. In my opinion, Meri preferred to have the secret with Cody to gain favor with him, and it seems to me a move of self-interest on Meri's part, not only regarding getting more attention from Cody, but also in getting Robyn as an ally for herself within the dynamic within the household. At this time, Meri felt within the family she did not have a role, and having this secret with Cody and being a driving force behind adding Robyn probably made Meri feel like she fulfilled a purpose within the family, even if it was behind the backs of Christine and Janelle. Is Meri someone who puts her sister wives' needs ahead of her own needs? In the studies by Professor Yankowiak, he said part of what predicts the success of a polygamous family dynamic is the sister wives putting the family ahead of themselves, and all of the sister wives getting along and being considerate of each other's needs. Was Meri putting the family first and the best interests of her sister wives, Janelle and Christine, first? Did Meri consider their feelings having this secret with Cody, or did she use the secret to gain rapport and favor with Cody at a low point in her relationship to serve her own needs and get more attention from Cody? I find it cruel and manipulative and inconsiderate towards Janelle and Christine, in my opinion. Meri, Robyn, and Cody had a wonderful relationship, but when it was time for Robyn to explore her relationship with Cody one-on-one on a deeper level, things became more difficult for Meri. Imagine how difficult it was for Janelle and Christine to be blindsided so Meri could share this secret to gain favor with Cody. I'm sure as soon as Cody was in love and googly-eyed, that favor and attention Meri may have gained from the secret vanished in the blink of an eye. Meri writes, I had been instrumental in bringing Robyn and Cody together, and now I wasn't needed anymore. It seems to me that Meri wanted to feel needed and important, and Cody allowed Meri to feel that at first. But once his relationship with Robyn progressed to one-on-one, Meri felt discarded and unneeded, so Cody stopped making Meri feel integral to the process and special. And if Meri is mentioning she felt unneeded, it makes me feel her purpose in hiding the secret from her sister wives was specifically to gain favor with Cody and to feel special with Cody. Meri says Cody had to spend a lot of time away from home because Robyn lived so far away during the courtship. Initially, Cody took a wife and some of her kids with him on these trips to court Robyn so they could all get to know each other, but eventually Cody stopped including the wives so that he and Robyn could get time alone to get to know each other to build their relationship. Meri writes, Robyn's presence transformed from something that filled me with joy to something that made me extremely lonely, as well as feeling the love that Cody and I shared was once again being threatened. In my opinion, Meri thought because Robyn had kids and was a divorcee, Cody would never go too far with her because he vowed never to marry a woman with kids because he felt it was too complicated to raise another man's children. He was adamant about that per the book. In chapter 2, Cody writes, I had seen older men marrying women who had children by their first husbands. I didn't think that I should or could bring other people's children into my life and merge my family with someone else's. At the time, I felt that this would be disruptive to the children and uncomfortable for the ex-husband. Normally, Cody does things his way, so I imagine Meri may have thought Robyn wouldn't necessarily be a woman Cody would actually marry when it came down to it. I think, and this is just my opinion of course, Meri wanted to get closer to Cody and encourage this relationship with Robyn, knowing she had kids and knowing Cody's thoughts on it. So Meri probably thought it would end up going nowhere in the back of her mind someplace. Meri says Cody and Robyn started courting at a low point in her marriage, the lowest point. Their 20-year anniversary was approaching, and Meri learned so much time together makes or breaks you. She and Cody have very different ways of communicating. Cody will be happy to just stop talking about an issue and to move on, never discussing it again, considering it dealt with. Meri needs to discuss issues and get closure. Because of their difference in communication styles, Meri and Cody typically found it easier to ignore problems rather than to address them. I find this interesting. We know what the televised 20th anniversary was like. Meri confronted Cody to try and get him to understand her feelings, and Cody refused to address it, and he seemed resentful of Meri for calling him out. And he even said he felt like a hypocrite. I feel that Cody just doesn't give a fuck about his wife's feelings, and he doesn't really care. He sees any complaints as whining, and it's not his problem. He doesn't find his wife's voices to be valid. In Cody's mind, he is the only voice that counts. So when a wife goes to him, like Meri with her feelings, he just is like talking to a wall. He decides he isn't ever going there, no discussion, done, end of story, and don't mention it again, basically. And Meri wants to be heard and understood and validated. And she wants her husband, her partner in life, to care about what she goes through and understand it on some level. But Cody doesn't care. He doesn't want to know about it or understand it or discuss it incessantly. He doesn't have the empathy or the understanding to be able to put himself in his wife's shoes. And at the anniversary dinner, he said that he would feel like a hypocrite if he were to address those feelings that Meri has. So he refuses to go there and he prefers his own convenience. Whatever is convenient to him is what he will do. And that's my opinion. Because Meri feels like she can express herself and still not be heard, it's like speaking to an inanimate object. It's a futile effort. So she just stops having a voice, knowing it will fall on deaf ears. And that's how Cody prefers it, because then he doesn't have to be annoyed or inconvenienced by all of these feelings and issues. Meri says things that could have been solved quickly with a conversation ballooned, and it led to a lot of misunderstanding and strife between herself and Cody. Around the time that Cody and Robyn began courting, Meri realized they needed to take steps to repair their relationship. Meri felt insignificant and insecure in her relationship with Cody. So she struggled with all the time Cody had to spend away from the house. As a result, Meri turned inward and she wondered what benefit she was to the family. She says she and Cody were hanging by a thread while he was off courting Robyn. Although courting Robyn was partly her idea, the reality of the situation was difficult for her. Meri felt a connection to Robyn and she wanted Cody to court her, but she was dealing with the emotions of Robyn's courtship on top of the emotions coming from her relationship struggles with Cody. Meri and Cody were in a vicious cycle dealing with many emotions like hurt, anger, rejection, and sadness. Let's not forget, to Meri, Kody was the love of her life, her one romantic love, her soulmate for life. And I'm sure she could see that the romance and love with Robyn and Kody surpassed her relationship at its current state. And that's a major threat to her relationship with Kody. Remember, with Janelle, Meri said she could tolerate incorporating Janelle into the family because she and Kody had a romantic love. And with Janelle, she knew it wasn't romantic whatsoever. So it made it more palatable for Meri. It made it easier to stomach. With Robyn, not only was it a romantic love, but both Robyn and Kody were gushing and googly-eyed, all aglow, talking of their love and the notion of them being soulmates all day long, even in front of the other wives and the brown kids. So to know, not only is it a romantic love, but it's something stronger and deeper than your own relationship with Kody, I can't imagine the emotional toll and the suffering this causes, especially with two highly insensitive people like Kody and Robyn, who gushed and were very vocal with it. We even know Mariah said in season 1, Kody acted like a teenager in love. And Mykelti was wearing Kody's jacket one day, and she was near Robyn, and Robyn noticed it was Kody's jacket, so she smelled it and told Mykelti, "I miss your dad." Imagine how much the insensitivity of Robyn and Kody magnified the suffering for Kody's wives. Also, recall the Angel Park study in the FLDS version of Polygamy. The ideal for the faith is harmonious familial love, and romantic love is viewed as a contradiction to the purpose of living polygamy, and it complicates achieving harmonious familial love. It's an obstacle to it, in fact. So the fact that there is so much suffering over wanting to maintain romantic love when it is in direct contradiction to the purpose of plural marriage just goes to show wanting monogamous romantic love is instinctive, and even when living plural marriage for faith-based reasons, that harmonious familial love, which is the purpose of plural marriage, is just an ideal that isn't really achievable. Kody says he decided to live the principle solely based on faith, but if the ideal of the faith is harmonious familial love, how is Kody behaving like an infatuated teen in front of his family, gushing about his love with soulmate Robyn in line with the faith, his reason for living plural marriage? In fact, it contradicts the faith, as does Robyn gushing about Kody being her soulmate and smelling his jacket. The priority is supposed to be the family, not the individual marriages or romantic love between each sister wife and the husband. Meri says it got to the point where she and Kody didn't enjoy being around each other, and when they were together, they could barely say anything without setting the other one off. They didn't talk a lot or enjoy each other's company. She felt Kody was shutting her out of his life completely. They decided to go to marriage counseling so they could feel solid in their relationship as Kody courted Robyn. Robyn was also anxious about Kody and Meri fixing things before she came into the family. Counseling was the hardest thing Meri ever did. The counselor helped Kody and Meri find a common way to communicate. Kody became more patient with Meri when she wanted to discuss problems. Meri was able to learn that sometimes her aggressive attitude made it difficult for Kody to hear her. Meri says it took a lot of hard work, but now she and Kody are at their best. She says they are again very much in love, and it's wonderful to know Kody is her soulmate. That aged like milk. It makes me sad for Meri because we know things are terrible now, and Kody and Meri are barely acquaintances. Kody can barely pretend to tolerate Meri, and he sticks the knife in and twists over the catfish thing every chance he gets, as Meri still hopes somewhere inside her that Kody will accept her as his wife again, or that things will improve in some way. Meri struggled a lot with her fertility issues, with her place in the family, with her relationship with Kody, and other than getting to have a big family and lots of kids around like she hoped she would have biologically herself, what does the lifestyle really bring Meri? Is it worth the suffering and struggle? What keeps Meri in? Is it faith? Is it Meri fearing being alone? Is it fear of losing the larger family? I think Meri ties her whole identity to the larger family, but I wonder what truly keeps her. In my opinion, she doesn't seem happy, and maybe she is behind the scenes. Who knows? We only get a glimpse. But I wonder if we got inside of Meri's mind, what we would find. If Meri refuses to leave and seek happiness and fulfillment and what she deserves, what does Meri value as greater than that to stay? Only Meri knows. Meri says meeting with the marriage counselor strengthened her resolve to get her own license in counseling. She wanted to help other polygamous families with their struggles because of her experiences in a polygamous family. When Robyn decided to join the family, she began seeing the same counselor as Cody and Meri, who was experienced in dealing with polygamous families. Robyn was determined to forge a good relationship with Meri. Robyn listened to Meri's emotional struggles and she was patient. They sometimes went to counseling as a group with Meri, Cody, and Robyn, and sometimes Meri and Robyn did their own separate couples counseling together to work through issues before they would fester and become huge disagreements. Meri says the relationship with Cody and Robyn was new and exciting and they were happy together. Her relationship with Cody was at a different stage, and because they were struggling, it was easy for her to blame Robyn. She says in her head it felt as though if Robyn were not around, Cody would not be treating her so unfairly. Cody was her husband, so she couldn't put the blame on him, and she felt she surely wasn't at fault, so in her mind, the obvious answer was Robyn, and she was wrong about that. Meri and Robyn had to learn to be friends outside of their marriages to Cody, and Meri had to learn not to blame Robyn for her struggles with Cody. She had to look inward and admit her own faults to improve herself. Meri had to learn how others perceived her and open herself to allowing Robyn into her world. Meri's relationship with Christine and Janelle was long-term, but Meri wasn't happy with either of those relationships, even though they were all comfortable with where they were. Meri and Janelle learned how to function well with each other. They aren't very close, but things are good. Meri and Christine know how to goof off and have fun together. They have a good surface level relationship, but Meri says there's absolutely no depth to it. Meri says when she met Robyn, she knew there was a special closeness in their future. Meri knew she had to make herself available and safe for Robyn to want to let her in. Because Meri was able to improve herself, she was able to find a sweet, loving sister-wife relationship with Robyn. She says she and Robyn are at a wonderful place, and that is a testament to what a wonderful, beautiful principle her family is engaged in. When it's Cody's night at Meri's, Robyn and her kids will come over to Meri's on her night with Cody to visit. But she has never had to ask for Robyn to give she and Cody space. Meri says Robyn is always sensitive and aware of what she needs. Robyn is always a step ahead. Robyn and Meri have learned to respect each other's marriages, and from this, their relationship has grown strong. Meri admits there will always be minor struggles with her sister wives. When the five of them are together, they have to figure out how to interact. All of the sister wives are uncomfortable with Cody showing one wife affection in front of them. When they are all together at one wife's house and the get-together has ended, they have learned that they need to allow Cody space and time with each wife as she leaves to go home. Meri says it would be uncomfortable for Cody to kiss his wives goodbye all in a line. She says she wants more privacy than that, and her sister wives deserve that too. The emotional intimacy Cody has with each wife is private and personal, and so the sister wives allow each other time and space to embrace it. Meri says some people think after being married for so long, it wouldn't bother the sister wives to see Cody showing each of them affection. It's a matter of respecting everyone's space and relationship rather than it being about jealousy, Meri says. She writes, "It's not a hard and fast rule, but I believe that one of the key factors in being a good sister wife is having the ability to see the needs of another sister wife and considering her needs more important than your own. I have been on both the giving and receiving end, and not only does it help build my relationship with Cody, but it strengthens my relationships with all my sister wives. Also, it is very important to allow Cody and a wife to have their own relationship, not having to be bothered with outside concerns. We have a lot of family time that involves all of us, but when it's time for Cody and a wife to have their own time, I make it a habit to not call him unless it's something extremely important. Even at that, I will usually just text him and allow him to respond when it's convenient for him." Meri continues, "For me, it's as simple as do unto others. I wouldn't want my time with Cody to be interrupted unnecessarily, so I make a point of respecting my sister wives' time with him equally. One of the benefits of plural marriage is that you are forced to confront your own weakness of character and work on being the best wife, sister, and mother you can be. I'm confident that I would not be the person I am today if I had chosen a monogamous marriage. As we know, Professor Yankowiak says on Sister Wives that one of the factors that dictates the success of a plural dynamic and a healthy dynamic within the plural family is each sister wife putting the other's needs ahead of her own and putting the family ahead of their own self-interests or marriage on their priority list. So it's interesting that Meri agrees with that and she understands that. I also think it's interesting that Meri is trying to suggest she wouldn't have been able to improve herself or overcome what she considers her weakness if she was in a monogamous relationship with Cody, especially considering that some of her happiest times with Cody seemed to be in the first 3 years of their marriage when they had a monogamous relationship. The faith drills into the minds of its female adherents that the jealousy and insecurity and the host of other emotional struggles inherent to plural marriage are their personal weaknesses to overcome, and that living polygamy makes you the best version of yourself, and God wants that. But having those emotions is instinctive and natural to humans, especially in those romantic relationships. It's not a weakness to overcome or shove down to make one their best self in denying your own intuitive and instinctual human desire for wanting a monogamous romantic love and feeling jealousy and insecurity when you have to share your husband and inevitably suffering to become your best. To me, that's total BS. By the way, plenty of that suffering and plenty of those emotions still come up in monogamy as well. Everyone has some degree of jealousy or insecurity regarding certain things, and it's natural, and it's good to check yourself and be in control of your emotions, maintaining a healthy mental state, but it's not a weakness to overcome to become your best. It's a natural thing, and humans have those emotions for a reason. It's not something that will ever vanish or be 100% conquered because life ebbs and flows, and you will continue to have experiences throughout the journey of life, whether you engage in monogamy, polygamy, polyamory, whatever your cup of tea. And it's not an inherent weakness or deficiency to feel those negative emotions. Also, I find it interesting that last season, one of Christine's complaints was that when Cody would come over to spend time with her branch of the family, he would be glued to his phone, preoccupied with texting and stuff. One has to wonder what wife texted Cody incessantly during her time. Which wife doesn't respect Cody's night with his family when he isn't with them? I wonder about that. Meri writes, when Robyn married Cody, she thanked Janelle, Christine, and me for training him to be the guy he is now. Like myself, Cody is so much more emotionally mature than he was when we married. But Robyn is not the sole beneficiary of this growth. After 22 years, Cody and I are better than ever. We share a deep and passionate love, and finally, understand each other's love language. Personally, I would be so insulted if my husband's new wife thanked me for training my husband as if he's a dog to be trained. Also, Robyn herself must not have felt Cody was trained so well because on the honeymoon special, she directed Cody on how to behave when he called his wives, and she urged him to call them daily and right away when Cody wanted to put it off. And she told Cody he had to be more mature. So obviously, Cody wasn't trained to Robyn's standards. Also, what an insult to say, thank you for suffering through the pain and fighting and all of the adjustments you all had to go through as wives so I can get the fully functional best version of Cody without having to suffer myself. I wouldn't take it as a compliment and I would feel it was completely arrogant. Also, obviously, Meri and Cody aren't better than ever, as we know, of course. Cody gives her less regard than a neighbor or acquaintance, on the show at least. She may have made a mistake in how she conducted herself in finding love, but she also deserves more than a husband who abandoned her on all fronts as well, physically, emotionally, communicatively, intimately. And Meri sacrificed her whole life for Cody to be with Cody. And every chance he gets, Cody pours salt on the wound and twists the knife, even saying Meri deceived him before they married just because his ego was bruised, when he contributed majorly to Meri feeling isolated and alone, and to Meri wanting to feel loved and appreciated. She should have left the family first and then found love in real life rather than behind a keyboard with internet strangers as a recognized TV personality, of course. But even Meri deserves love and fulfillment, and in my opinion, she deserves much better than Kody. Meri says when they moved to Vegas, they discovered they wouldn't be able to find one big house to live in. They decided to live in 4 separate homes so each wife and her children could have the space to nurture their individual relationships with Kody, while trying to find homes close enough so they could all function as a family. Meri has learned to love having her space. Since the move to Vegas, Meri doesn't get to see Kody every day. She says recently they went 5 whole days without seeing each other. Wow, if that was a long time for Meri, how does it feel now in the current state of the relationship, only seeing Kody randomly at family functions? I wonder if Meri sees Kody even once a month, if that. Also, anytime Meri sees Kody, it's probably with the family at events and not one-on-one. Meri says, absence makes the heart grow fonder. When she does get to see Kody, it feels new and refreshing because they get to miss each other. Meri writes, when we go to family reunions and I see my family members who are monogamists, I often wonder, how can you have your husband around all the time? When do you have time for yourself? I can't imagine their lifestyle, but then again, they can't understand mine either. I would never trade my experience with sister wives and the wonderfully large and dynamic family we share for the simplicity of monogamy. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It feels as though Meri has some type of condescending attitude or some type of arrogance or superiority for being a polygamist, as if monogamy is just this simple thing. It's a lesser structure. I wonder how she feels about her words now, and relationships take a lot of work, whether it's monogamous or polygamous or polyamorous. Also, regarding never trading her sister wife experience, where are her sister wives now exactly? Christine left, and I hope she finds someone to appreciate her if she wants that for herself. Janelle and Meri share a surface level, very strained relationship at best, and it's not like they do lunch. And as far as Robyn, her closest sister wife, during the pandemic, when Meri, who lived alone and was isolated and was following Kody's insane mandates, Meri, who was not a threat or at high risk to get COVID in her living situation, was not allowed at Robyn's for almost a year. Even though Kody told Robyn it was fine, Robyn didn't even check in with Meri and her well-being. Kody barely called, if that, and Robyn never invited Meri over, even though she knows Meri needs a social life to feel well. Meri loves the kids, and Robyn refused to invite Meri over, making the excuse that Janelle and Christine would be upset that they were not welcome since they do not follow Kody's mandates. The whole 9 or 10 months, Janelle and Christine were getting together following CDC guidelines, and they did things together with Janelle's kids and Christine's kids, and they assumed Meri was interacting with Robyn and Kody and the kids, and they were shocked to learn Meri was alone and isolated all of that time. And they had no interest in even going to Robyn's house, and they were always close anyways, and they were always hanging out together. They wouldn't have felt slighted at all by Meri being welcomed over to Robyn's when they weren't welcomed over because they had no interest in even being there. If Robyn cared about Meri, she wouldn't make bullshit excuses, and Meri would be welcomed over rather than isolated away from the family for almost a year. It wasn't fair to Meri, and it was selfish of Robyn, who in my view doesn't care about Meri as a sister, or she would have been welcomed. That does it for this episode of Becoming Sister Wives Book Club. Look out for the next episode of Seeking Sister Wife this week. Next book club episode will be covering Chapter 6 on Janelle, and also look out for the next episode of my Sister Wives Rewatch, Season 2, Episode 9, No Place for Home. That will probably be next week. I will also eventually get to the next episode of Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube viewers. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.